No, there's over here.
But you gotta have your arm under. All right, that should be good. And now that we got our clickbait thumbnail, sorry about that, but you know, algorithms and such. And in today's video, we're gonna be talking about everything that you need to put a gyro on your bike for a gyro setup. Now, one caveat to this is that I have a very specific gyro setup. I have dual upper and lower cables. There's also such a thing as single to double cables that you can have on both the top and the bottom as well, and you can combine them in different ways for a mixture of both. So I'm going to point that out there while I'm talking about this, but I wanted to make sure I pointed it out now and saying that this is not the only setup you can have for a gyro. This is my setup, and I'll explain all of the different setups you can have, and hopefully that rooster in the background is not too annoying. But let's start at the top of the bike. You're gonna need a brake lever. The brake lever is something you're gonna have to take into consideration depending upon what type of cable you're gonna get. Because if you're going to have dual upper cables like I do and have an Odyssey mono lever and not use the M2 lever, which has designated cables that you have to buy specifically for it, you're gonna use this mono lever with dual upper cables. You have to modify some of these pieces because the barrel adjuster for this thing is too big for the adapter. I have videos about this. You can follow those videos and hopefully it will help you, but it's something that you have to take into consideration, and different levers have different size barrel adjusters that fit some of these dual upper cables. So you could also get a single to double upper cable, and then you only have to worry about one cable going in here, so it really doesn't matter at all which lever you have in that setup if you have a single to double upper cable. And with that, let's talk about the cable itself. So here we've got dual upper cables. As you can see, there's two cables here. One goes to the top, one goes to the bottom, and you have to have some sort of an adapter piece, which usually comes with stock dual upper cables. It all comes together with what you need. And as you're probably seeing right now, there are quite a lot of check marks when it comes to having a gyro, things that you're gonna have to get. And I will say that when it comes to the top cables, single to double can be just as good as having dual, because virtually you have a single to double whenever you're running a dual cable up here, because it's going into one point on the lever anyways. You just have 2 points where it can break. And then we move down here, and we've got a gyro plate that the cables are going into on both sides. You're gonna need a gyro plate. No matter what style cables you have, you're gonna have to have a gyro plate. It usually comes with your stem, so you might have one if you bought a brand new stem, but if you don't, you're gonna need to get one. They're only like $7 or $8, maybe $10. Not too bad, very simple. And then we can move down to the heart of it all, the gyro. Hey, my clickbait's back. Anyways, the gyro. It's the heart of your gyro setup. Most of them are very similar, but some of them are different. This one, for example, has set screws in it that I use because I don't have cable ends. So that's another thing you're gonna wanna take into consideration. Do you wanna have the screws for extra safety? If you plan on using the exact same upper gyro cable setup as me, you're gonna have to have a gyro with screws because you will have no cable ends, but that's something for a totally different video, which you can find in one of these corners, wherever the info card shows up. But you're gonna need a gyro. And then from there, let's talk about a couple things that you're also going to need. You're gonna need a frame that has gyro tab holes in it so that you can screw in some gyro tabs to it. If you don't have gyro tabs in your frame, you're either gonna have to drill them, or you're gonna have to get another frame, or there's some pieces that you can get that kinda hang down into there. But to be totally honest, I'm not even sure if those work with modern frames or if those are only for older style headsets. But either way, you're gonna need some gyro tabs because you're gonna need something for your lower cable barrel adjusters to screw into. And now that I've mentioned barrel adjusters, you're gonna need barrel adjusters. These ones right here are all the same style of barrel adjuster, and you're gonna need at least 4 of those. And to be totally honest with you, if you're rough on your bike or you try any kinds of foot tricks at all, you're gonna end up kicking these and breaking them, so you're gonna want extras of those. So while you're buying all of this, make sure you get a hold of some extra barrel adjusters. Then moving down from there, we have some Break Noodles. That is something that I have on my setup, but you don't have to have those. It's just something that I prefer to use, and we'll talk about why whenever we get to the lower cables. And speaking of the lower cables, underneath my Break Noodles are my lower cables. These are custom made cables just because I custom make my entire gyro brake setup. And the reason that I use these Break Noodles here is because, as you can see, it gives me a perfectly straight shot from the Break Noodle to this bottom barrel adjuster, and it makes it so that it's a shorter amount of housing that you have to put in there whenever you replace them or put new ones on. And that just means that it's easier to build this setup up. I actually used a Odyssey slick cable to make this whole entire housing setup. So the whole Odyssey slick straight cable made all 4 of these brake housings, and that's pretty convenient. So that's why I do it that way. You don't have to do it that way. You can run your cable from here all the way up to your gyro tab in the barrel adjuster there. And speaking of lower cables as well, this is another place where you can get a different style of cable. You can get the single to double cable here so that you have 2 cables coming down from your gyro. They meet somewhere around here, and then 1 cable comes out, and then the straddle cable part comes into play. This is another place where there is so much variation in what you can get. You can have a straddle cable just like on a straight cable setup. You can have the dual lower cable here so that your cables run all the way to your brake arms. You can also have something like the fly setup where it's got these like cable things that run directly from the straddle cable up to their hanger. Kink, I think, has a different style. Kink has their own proprietary lower cables too, so that you don't even have to have NARPs or anything like that. So what you're gonna wanna do is just research brake setups that are out there, talk to people you know, figure out what you might want. And I will say that single to double is probably the easiest setup to get set up and going, because there's a lot going on here with 2 lower cables. Once you get it figured out, it really doesn't matter, but it can seem overwhelming at first. And now let's talk about the setup that we've got at the bottom of this dual lower gyro cable setup. We have to have something called a London mod here that bolts into your cable guide, because right here, if we don't, there's only 1 hole there, and we need to make something so that there's 2 holes for our barrel adjusters to screw into. So that's called a London mod. That's how it's known. They're not all called that. Odyssey has one. I think there's a couple other companies that make them. You just need to get a hold of one of those, and then you need to get a hold of some barrel adjusters for this as well. I actually use longer barrel adjusters here, and as you can see, it sticks out the back here. It's quite a long barrel adjuster compared to the ones that we have up here. And the reason for that is that I want more adjustment here at the bottom. And if I need to, I can crank that thing as far out as it will go without having to adjust my cables and where the stops are at. And with that being said, I have a different style of stop down here as well. So what we typically have, and I'll pull this out to show you, is a NARP that has an Allen screw in it that tightens into the cable, and then that goes into your brake arm. I don't use that because I don't like the fact that there's a pinch point where you're tightening onto the cable. I noticed that a lot of the times I was breaking cables right there, and if I completely eliminate that pinch point by just looping the cable through it like I've done, it just has pressure from being pulled on rather than being pinched. And then we use this straddle cable bolt, which you may recognize from a straight cable setup with a cable hanger. We use that bolt to tighten it down so that it's just being compressed rather than pinched. And that's the setup that I use. But like I said, most of the time with dual lower cables, you'll see a NARP on both sides, and that will tighten down and go into the brake arm and work that way. I've just used the dual cable setup for so long now that I've kind of figured out what I like, and I customize it and just make it work for my needs, and it makes my cables last longer. So I do have videos on how you do all of my different setups that I have, but you don't have to do them that way. And that's everything cable wise all the way leading up to your brakes. The whole reason that you're making this setup is that you want brakes, and a gyro setup usually gives you a more rock solid and dialed brake pull. That's why you're here watching this video. So you're gonna wanna get your hands on some brakes. A lot of brakes are similar these days, and most companies have a brake that they sell. So I would take a look at your favorite companies, see if they offer a brake, and then maybe get some opinions online from people who run those brakes and see if they're worth running and go from there. I use the Shadow Sano brakes. This is a version that I don't believe they make anymore. And I think that that does it for the brake setup. It's very simple whenever you break it down to all of the individual parts that you need to buy, but the explanations behind them and the different choices that go into what you actually buy are where things get complicated. And I believe that's everything that you need to know in order to get a gyro setup onto your BMX bike. If you guys want to learn how to put it on your bike or adjust the spring tension or anything like that, I've got an entire playlist devoted to brakes right here on the screen for you to hit. I've also got a subscribe button on there for those of you who haven't hit it yet, so that hopefully we'll see you tomorrow for another one and next Tuesday for another Tuesday tip. Thank you for watching. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. And my clickbait says goodbye.